messengers. We are messengers with 1,000 times. You're on 94.9. It is 4:15 and it's that time of day on a Tuesday for Creation Ministries International. And today we have Dr. Ron Neller on the line. Good afternoon, Dr. Ron.
Good afternoon, Mick. How are you?
Awesome. It is great to have you on again. And look, we've only got you like once this time round, but I believe next time we get you 3 times in a row, which is going to be really cool. But look, just for anyone who does want to send any questions through to Dr. Ron, the text line, just SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. Ron Neller, he's got a BA in and honours and a PhD in fluvial geomorphology. And, we've asked Dr. Ron all sorts of information about things like Fraser Island and all sorts of cool things before, floods. And, you might have some questions about floods. But today, Dr. Ron, we'll start by asking you, how was your holiday?
Interesting holiday. It was far more spreading the word and speaking in churches through Ireland and the UK, but it was also a delightful time to enjoy ministry. You travel at the same time. So no, it was a great holiday, but a lot of work and really fascinating work as well.
Yes. Now look, I've been sort of wondering, with all the stuff that's going on around the world, is there more fear in Europe at the moment?
Sorry, I missed that last bit. Is there
more fear?
I don't think it's fear, Meg. I think as we travel through Ireland and the United Kingdom, and we spoke in Ireland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England, I think what really hit us from a Christian point of view was the distinct lack of churches across those regions.
Wow.
And the incredible decrease in numbers of people who are attending churches. In fact, I did ask one of the pastors in one of the churches that I was speaking at, where are you at with the percentage of the population attending church? And they gave a figure of about 4%. And that is incredibly low and disturbing.
Yes.
And so I think that really shocked us because in the month prior to all of that, we had been speaking across Malaysia and Singapore, and there you are seeing a complete opposite. You're seeing an incredible growth in Christian faith, in the number of churches emerging. Even in Malaysia, Christian churches are emerging. And so there was an incredible contrast between the Ireland and the United Kingdom situation and that we see in Southeast Asia.
Of course, I have to ask why.
Well, I did ask quite a few pastors because I think we spoke about 15 different churches, and they were all lamenting the history of the decrease in numbers and the decreasing number of churches in certain towns. And it was an interesting point. They'd all point to various factors. And I guess what really hit me and my wife is if we refer to Scripture, to Romans 12 verse 2, do not be conformed to this world. And what these pastors were expressing was that churches were conforming themselves to this world. And so whether it was matters that you might ponder that there's been a lot of disagreement on, whether it's abortion or, some socially induced narcissism, or that the Bible is not truthful, historical, and foundational, I think what we're seeing in the United Kingdom, particularly, is that churches are conforming to the world. They are not following a biblical statement, do not be conformed to be the world, but to the will of God, who is good and acceptable and perfect. That was a sort of a summary statement, if you like, of what I was detecting across the United Kingdom.
Wow. So, I mean, they're not believing everything in the Bible?
Particularly the book of Genesis. They, indeed, even in the churches that allowed and wanted myself or my wife to speak, about the book of Genesis or about the creation message, I have never experienced so many people ask questions afterwards in a challenging way, in a quite confrontational manner. So one of the things that certainly the pastors realise in that region is there is a real failure to accept the book of Genesis as foundational to the Bible, to accept creation as the beginning, and to accept that the Bible, and particularly the book of Genesis, is truthful and historical.
Yep. Yeah, wow. And so people are they're sort of pulling away because all of a sudden the Bible doesn't mean as much as it used to.
And exactly, and that is coming out of being conformed to the world, where the world is challenging not just the Bible, but particularly challenging the book of Genesis, and especially challenging the creation message. Yeah. And so we tend to, rather than stand on our feet and be firm about this, we tend to give in to these sort of social norms. And the Bible tells us not to do that.
I mean, I was only reading a story today. It was talking about a cave woman from, so many years ago, and they painted a picture and said she had blue eyes and dark skin and all this sort of stuff. And I read through it. They talk about how old they are and paint this picture. And then right in the last paragraph, they basically say, we love more evidence because, we really don't know. And I just thought, wow, they just did this entire story. And then in the last little tiny bit, people have got to literally read right to the end to just get that justification for themselves. Oh, okay, so they don't really know. And too often people sort of look at these stories, they read them, they look at the pictures, and unfortunately they believe them, and that detracts from the Bible itself.
Exactly. And that I come across regularly, in fact almost daily, as an academic. When I look at whatever topic I'm looking at, as a Christian and an academic, I'll see all sorts of almost science fiction stories written, sounding wonderfully scientific, sounding wonderfully archaeology and everything else. But it's interesting that at the end, they always have to defend themselves with a statement. It's a statement of defense, essentially, that it's an interpretation. Let's put it that way. It's an interpretation. It's not an actual finding of certainty. It's just one person's interpretation.
Yeah. Well, in the case of the story I read, that up at the start of the story, while they're telling you all about this Stone Age person, they're saying that this information came from them testing the DNA. And it wasn't till that last paragraph in there they said, actually, you can't get the eye colour and the skin colour from the DNA yet. That's what the whole story was about. And I thought, what? You just said way up top that you got this information from the DNA, and right down the bottom you just go, basically, well, actually, we really can't get it from there. And I thought, wow, it really is. It's like an artist has created this whole story, and then at the end gone, oh, maybe.
Yes, and unfortunately, we become conformed to this world. We read the major part of the article, but not the last piece. Yep. With certainty. So we accept the argument without accepting the fact that it's an interpretation by an individual. And that conforms us to a whole lot of matters, especially doubting the Bible as foundational and historical and truthful. And that's what I found very disturbing in the United Kingdom and Ireland as well, whereas in Southeast Asia, where churches are blossoming and growing, they stand firmly on the Bible. And they stand there going, this is truthful, this is historical. Genesis did occur. The book of creation did occur. The flood occurred. All of these things, they accept them. And their churches are blossoming across Asia. It's more than just Malaysia and Singapore. It's across Asia. You're seeing a real blossoming going on of Christians. And so they are actually only discerning what is the will of God. They are not conforming to this world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? Well, what sort of questions when you were in England? What sort of questions were they throwing at you?
Well, there'll be a host of questions, and usually it's well, to give you some examples, obviously the 6th day is one that's commonly asked. How can it really be 6 days? That's a very common one. And they'll often try to insert thousands of years between verse 1 or verse 2, those sorts of things. They have a very, I think, I don't want to challenge them, but I think they need to get a bit more understanding of Hebrew, vocabulary structure, all sorts of things, to see that it is that the word yom is there, is absolutely meaning day, 24 hours, because it does use numbers 1, 2, and 3, or the terms morning and evening, and throughout the rest of the Bible, wherever we see that, we take it as 24 hours, but for some reason in Genesis 1, we don't. Yeah. And it's also, it's consecutive arguments. So in other words, what they're saying is it's 6 days, 6 consecutive days. That's a common question I'm asked. There'll be many questions on the flood as well. Did it really occur? Surely wasn't it just regional? Because you'll see the argument in the literature, in the secular literature, is abundant with the belief that the flood was only a local flood or a regional flood, not a global flood.
Yes.
So they'll take up what is being portrayed in the media and put it back to me, almost in a can you not see the science in this? Yep. When in fact it's not science, it's an interpretation. Yeah. So look, all these sorts of questions come forward. Then you've got the animals. How did they get to? How did the kangaroo get to Australia, for example? Yeah. That is a common question as well. How could it swim, and so on? And I mean, the answers to these questions are quite simple, and they're certainly founded on the Bible.
Well, let's get into them after the break, because I'd like to know as well how the kangaroo got to Australia. It's a very good question. It is 27 minutes past 4. You're on 94.9. We're going to listen to Taya right now. Going to be good. And we'll come back to Dr. Ron very shortly. If you have any questions in the meantime, please send them through to us. Just text 0401 949 949. That was Lauren Daigle with Oh Lord. You're on 94.9. It's 24 minutes to 5. And we have Dr. Ron Neller on the line. He's just come back from Europe. He's been chatting to churches over in Europe. And then he went over to Indonesia. And apparently there's been some big changes in what's going on in the world of church as far as the number of people going to churches and what people are believing in churches in different parts of the world. And, of course, over in England and that area, what was it, 4% of people are now going to church. Is that correct?
That was the figure given to me on numerous occasions. And, I don't have any problem with that. I mean, even in Australia, it's higher, but not much higher than that. It's about 8%, something like that. That did not shock me to hear that it was 4%.
Yes, but it's certainly going backwards, and we've been talking about some of the reasons, and one of them is of course, people not believing what's written in the Bible, what's written in Genesis, and right before the break, we started talking about kangaroos and how they got to Australia, and as soon as you mentioned that, I thought, well, yeah, how did they get to Australia?
Yeah, it's. I can give you an answer from an earth science point of view because that's my training. I'm not a biologist, so I can't really give you a kangaroo answer. But I can certainly share an interesting aspect that people may not be aware of, and that is that following the global flood, following Noah's flood, and the rise of the continents and so on, there was an ice age. A single ice age that occurred after the flood and probably ran for somewhere between 500 and 700 years. Now, when you have an ice age, and it's not an ice age that covers the entire Earth, it's only an ice age that covers about 12% of the continent, something like that. Might have been a bit higher in figure. So it covered Siberia and certainly parts of England, most of Scandinavia and Canada and so on. But it does lower the sea level somewhere in the order of, depending on the arguments, 50 to 80 metres, maybe even more, lower than it is today.
Wow.
Well, so when you have an ice age, you have a lowering of the sea level. Now, when that occurred, what happened was the North American continent connected by land to Asia.
Yep.
And so that allowed migration. Likewise, Australia would have been, I would say, almost connected to Asia. Most of the continental shelf would have been exposed and available and quite productive. You could walk across it. You could, the vegetation would be on it, and the water that would be perhaps in the way of the full connection would be minor and shallow. And so now this all occurred after the flood, and so you've got the distribution of animals. So in fact, there was no physical barrier for, say, the kangaroos to come to Australia because it was essentially connected.
Yep.
And I've seen kangaroos go swimming as well. They love it over short distances.
Yes,
I've seen them swim to Fraser Island in Queensland from the mainland. So they'll do that. So even if there are some narrow gaps, but the point is the continents on the Earth were essentially linked together for about 700 years after the flood, when the animals were all migrating outwards and occupying new ecosystems.
Yep. Of course, there's been types of kangaroos found in Indonesia, hasn't there?
Well, and elsewhere. So it's an interesting argument. They say, why do we only find them in Australia? Didn't they spread everywhere? Well, I'm not a biologist, but I am certainly aware that species don't just spread everywhere when given an opportunity. Maybe the rabbit is one example that does do that. But other species, they're looking for, they're not going to walk into any climatic zone. They're going to walk to where they, or jump, or hop to wherever they can. That's a more suitable environment. And they don't all spread out in a 360 degrees. That's not the way they migrate. They tend to migrate as clusters and whatever you want to call them in biological terms. Herds and all sorts of those sort of things. They don't all just spread out evenly. They tend to migrate, and of course they're not going to migrate in the same direction as the predators as well. So I don't think a kangaroo is going to want to travel with some lions. So there is the migration is not uniform. It's very much where the species, in terms of its adaptability, its so-called ability to adjust to an environment, it'll move in those directions. So the fact that it's come to Australia and survives here is probably because there were very few, if any, predators that got out this far, and so here it did survive. That doesn't mean it wasn't elsewhere, that they didn't migrate elsewhere. I would say there's no evidence that it didn't work, that they didn't. Sorry, I would say they could have migrated elsewhere. But equally, we're not going to find them in the fossil record migrating elsewhere because the fossils were created during the Noah's flood. Yep. We don't see fossils being created today. So, so I don't have any problem with them being in Australia and how they got here and so on.
Wow. And Indonesia, tell us a little bit about Indonesia and the churches there.
Well, I was actually in Singapore. And I was also in Borneo, actually. But I was in the Malaysian part of Borneo. Okay. So, we all think of that as Indonesia, and I certainly have done it in the past. But I actually have a lot of friends in Indonesia as well who are Christians, and so their testimony is the same as in Singapore or in Malaysia or in Sarawak in Borneo, and that is that there's a blossoming of Christians. In fact, in Sarawak, we often consider Borneo to be a poverty-struck island, but Sarawak stunned me when I went there. Skyscrapers, massive shopping centres, all of the rest of it. It's been an incredible boom that's occurred economically and spiritually over the last 5 to 10 years. Wow. And I went to a church there, which you'd be fascinated by, had 4,000 seats in the church hall. That's amazing. And they had a youth group of 5,000. And so there's a blossoming going on across Southeast Asia.
Well, what town was that?
Malaysia,
Whereabouts in Sarawak?
it was the capital city of Sarawak. And now you're testing me to remember the name.
Okay. It's not Cebu or Bintulu?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's
I'm looking at a map, that's all.
I'd have to do the same, to be honest, because I flew in, flew out, and really was hoping to spend more time there, but I had to get back to back to Penang to speak there. But in Penang, for example,
Wow.
speaking there in some Baptist churches and other churches as well, Presbyterian churches, they were asking not for a single talk. They were asking for 1 day or 3 day retreats where we talked about creation, whether it be biological, genetics, whether it be earth, whether it be the flood, whether it be astrophysics, whether it be youth groups. So they're not exploring creation in the book of Genesis in a light-hearted manner. They're treating it as a proper Bible study for the entire church.
Yeah.
And those churches were also very big, very large churches that are not commonly seen even in Australia. So we're seeing a blossoming of Christian faith in those areas. And the fascinating thing that connected them all was their acceptance of the Bible, that it is from very beginning to the very end, absolutely the truth and historical.
It's interesting because you almost assume or expect it'll be the other way around. You know, the English-speaking countries in England, you know, their church would be going through the roof, and the Asian countries not so much. But it just goes to show, you know, people who really believe in the Bible, or I guess they have the faith in the Bible, and then their faith grows because they're learning from the truth.
Oh, exactly. In Taiwan, the latest stat I was given when I was actually in Taiwan at a Christian university there visiting, they said 16% of people go to Christian churches in Taiwan. Yeah. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? We would consider England to be a Christian country. We would perhaps not consider Taiwan to be a Christian country.
Yes.
But if only 4% of the English population is going to church and 16% of the Taiwanese population is going to church, I think we have to remap our way of thinking about which is a Christian country and which is a more Gentile country. And I would say quite boldly that England is now no longer a Christian; it's a Gentile country.
Wow, that's a little sad.
It is sad. It really, look, we thoroughly enjoyed speaking in various churches, and whether they were Baptist, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, Brethren, didn't worry us. We thoroughly enjoyed it. What really hit us was the empty churches as we drove around, empty churches everywhere. And then the numbers attending in the churches that we got to speak in were also down and have been declining over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And it just sort of, it really affected us. It sort of broke our hearts to see that. And hence, when I came back to Australia, what really fills me with a bit of passion now is we're on a similar track. And we need to sort of get a grip on that. Or in 10 to 20 years, we could be like England.
Yeah.
So I think we need to come to grips with, the scripture that I was talking about is we must not be conformed to this world.
Mm.
And I think, unfortunately, too often we are, even as Australians.
Absolutely. So important that we do believe the Bible. And look, for anybody out there who has questions, go to creation.com, an awesome resource, thousands of pages of information. Some of them Dr. Ron has actually written. And it's so much science is actually in the Bible to prove what's really going on, to prove the truth of the Bible, the truth of creation. And, that's what Creation Ministries is all about. And we thank you so much, Dr. Ron, for spending the time with us. And I've got to say, I'm really excited. We've got you for 3 weeks in a row next time.
No, thank you, Nick. Really, really good to be online with you and chat.
Yes, thank you so much. It's awesome to have you. You are on 94.9 this afternoon. It is 12 minutes to 5. We've got Corin Hawthorne up next with Speak to Me.